Sauron was the greatest of the Maiar, the immortal spirits created by Eru Illuvatar, and he had been around since the days before the days. That is, before the years of the trees or the sun, and way before the numbered ages of Middle-earth. So obviously, he would have accumulated a few pads, and for an evil of his caliber, he would also need a few addresses for his burgeoning orc forces. Ironically, most of the fortresses that Sauron came to occupy were made by men and elves to protect themselves from him. When we think of Sauron's abode, we usually think of a dark, cloudy skyline, with the towering Barad-dur with Mount Doom in the back, but he had a few of these monstrosities to his credit. So let's check out all of his digs and see what he got up to in them. The image many of us carry of Barad-dur, the Black Gate, came from the gorgeous artistic impressions of Alan Lee and John Howe. Alan Lee was especially tough to track as the man was a reclusive artist. When The Lord of the Rings was in pre-production, Peter Jackson wrote to Lee about the LOTOR films and the immense responsibility of capturing the magic of Tolkien's world. He invited Alan Lee and John Howe to design the LOTOR concept designs, and so began the painstaking process of crafting Sauron's towers with pencil, paint, miniature, and bigature crafting, and CGI. Folks, if after J.R.R. Tolkien, anyone deserves a loud shout out for giving us the live and breathing world of Middle-earth, it's Peter Jackson and his fabulous team. Okay, moving on. Let's start the video strong with Sauron's ultimate stronghold. Before we get into it, we have a small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing. It's a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Barad-dur. The Dark Tower, or Barad-dur, was seen as an extension of Sauron's soul by John Howe, whose art was used to make the tower for the Peter Jackson films. He said if Sauron's mind could take shape, it would become a hideously tall tower like Barad-dur. Howe's perception of it was absolutely spot on, because in Tolkien's stories, Barad-dur rose and fell, rose again, and then fell again, with Sauron's being. In Middle-earth's second and third ages, Barad-dur served as Sauron's high seat. After Sauron revealed himself to all, he built the Dark Tower in Mount Doom's proximity. It took more than 5 centuries in the making. It was in Barad-dur that Sauron amassed his strength as well as his main army of orcs, and to this tower he returned to regroup every time that he suffered defeat, such as after the Battle of Gwatlow against Numenor and after the Battle of the Last Alliance. But after the latter battle, he was so utterly defeated by the combined might of Gil-galad and Elendil, not to mention he'd lost the One Ring, that it took him a lot more time to return home. But as the ring persisted, so did Sauron's soul and the foundations of Barad-dur. After Sauron fully revived, he re-erected Barad-dur. 1,000 years since he had to abandon his fractured home, he returned there, and it remained his digs till the final reckoning. In the LOTOR movie trilogy, Jackson's team built a 27-foot-tall model of Barad-dur, based on John Howe's Tolkien 91 calendar. The model was scaled up and used for the film scenes. Ralph Bakshi's animated adaptation, often called the most faithful representation of Tolkien's story, also shows Barad-dur on a mountainside, though this depiction is without the Great Eye. By the way, have any of you played the Middle-earth Shadow of War game? If you have some idea of the tower building phases and changes over time. One of the game's interesting features. Minas Morgul. Amid the forever gloomy sky and earth of Morgul Vale, an imposing fortress lit with a pale green glow that Tolkien describes as a corpse light. It was Minas Morgul. Do you recall the beacon of Minas Morgul shooting a green light into the sky in the Return of the King film? Well, more details to jog your memory on that later. Minas Morgul was the haunt of Sauron's vassals, the Ringwraiths, but it wasn't always this way. Morgul was once a charming fort city of Minas Ithil, erected at the eastern rim of Gondor as a watchtower for Mordor. Its white marble halls were said to always shine with moonlight. Built by Isildur, son of Elendil, in the Valley of the Mountains of Shadow after his brother and him took charge of Gondor, its foremost courtyard was planted with the first white tree of Nimloth. One of the Palantirs given to Isildur by his father was also placed here and came to be called the Ithil Stone. This thriving city was tragically captured by Sauron, who hated the faithfuls for their refusal to dance to his tune in Numenor. But Isildur's brother, Anarion, took the city back. The fight for Minas Ithil sowed the seeds that devised the last alliance of men and elves against Sauron in the Second Age. Unfortunately, Ithil became crippled by a great plague that wiped out most of its population. In the Third Age, Sauron's Nazguls took control of the fortress and transformed it into an evil base, renaming it Minas Morgul. Sauron's main army in the War of the Ring was in Minas Morgul under the Witch King of Angmar. This special fortress was a place of prying, menacing vibes. It felt as though the fortress was always watching you. The people passing by the city found it hard to look at its deathly glow. Men who lingered here long enough plunged into insanity, and even later on, when Sauron and his ring were definitively destroyed, the fort leveled, Aragorn forbade anyone from making a home here. In Peter Jackson's Return of the King, Gollum leads Frodo and Sam through this fortress. The One Ring draws Frodo to the glowing gates, but Gollum and Sam yank him back to sanity. Dol Guldur. Dol Guldur was Sauron's dark abode when his defeated incorporeal pieces finally took the form of the Necromancer in the Third Age. After his crushing defeat in the War of the Last Alliance, Sauron lost his physical body and hid for almost 1 millennium. When he re-emerged again, he began to go by the name Necromancer. Necromancer raised Dol Guldur on Amon Lanc, a hill that was once the abode of the Sylvan Elves. Sauron remained well hidden inside Dol Guldur for hundreds of years, but eventually, the shadows and gloom he exuded began to spread around his hill of dark sorcery, and someone began to take notice. Gandalf's suspicions mounted, and he went to Dol Guldur to see what was happening there. Sauron abandoned the fortress, unwilling to have a one-on-one with Gandalf as he wasn't strong enough to face another Maiar yet. But anyone who knows Sauron knows he will not easily give up what he believes is his. After a period of watchful peace, he returned to Dol Guldur. Gandalf knew now that the Necromancer was Sauron, and with some persistent pestering, he got the White Council of powerful elves and wizards to attack Dol Guldur. Sauron was pushed out of there once again, but the tenacious brat that he was, he got it back yet again. About a decade later, he put his Nazguls on the job, and the fort was his. Galadriel finally destroyed Dol Guldur after Celeborn's army captured it after the War of the Ring. Dol Guldur featured in the Hobbit movies, which were set in the Necromancer timeline. The moment in the Battle of the Five Armies when Galadriel takes a dark, terrifying form to defeat Sauron and the Ringwraiths is my favorite from this location. What about you? Do you have a top moment from Dol Guldur? The Black Gate. Tolkien described Morannon, or the Black Gate, as a black stone and iron fort wall. It was the place where the fate of Middle-earth was ultimately decided. The Black Gate was Sauron's structural defense to secure Mordor's northern perimeter, and spread from the Mountains of Ash to the Efeldauth Range. It was a stout barrier with a heavy orc guard that could not be penetrated barring its one gate, the sole entrance to Mordor. The two Towers of the Teeth stood at either bounds of the Black Gate, originally built by the men of Gondor, but they were claimed by Sauron's servants after the Great Plague, just like Minas Morgul. After the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, Gandalf impressed upon the victorious captains of Middle-earth that a conclusive victory against Sauron could not be achieved with arms, but with the destruction of the One Ring. And so the captains and their armies made the perilous journey to the Black Door, losing many men to fear along the way. At the entrance of the Black Gate, Aragorn, Gandalf, and the warriors of Middle-earth faced off against orcs, trolls, and Nazguls, while the ring-bearer Frodo Baggins and Samwise got free passage through the cracks to Mount Doom. As the Black Gate was erected with the power of the ring, it fell with the ring. The 1980 Return of the King animation shows the Black Gate as a gray stone wall. However, Peter Jackson's rendition was based on Lee and Howe's design, which looks eerily similar to the image that Tolkien's words brew up in one's mind. The Black Gate is first shown in the film when Frodo and Sam reach it, and think of going through its iron doors, but it turns out it was too dangerous to just gallivant through. Duh. So they abandoned the idea and find another godforsaken way with Gollum. In the final film of the PJ trilogy, the Battle of Morannon is fought here, but in this rendition, Aragorn decapitates the vile mouth of Sauron, unlike the books where the mouth is allowed to disappear inside the gate after rudely refuting Aragorn. I've got to say, watching the mouth of Sauron taken out like that was super satisfying. Minas Tirith, First Age. No, this is not the Minas Tirith of the Battle of Pelennor Fields or Aragorn's coronation. This was a watchtower on the Isle of Tol Sirion that was also called Minas Tirith in the First Age. Minas Tirith was one of the first constructions erected in Middle-earth by the most just and beloved of elves, Finrod. The tower secured the pass of Sirion against Morgoth. Once Finrod became too busy with the kingship of Nargothrond, he made his nephew Orodreth responsible for Minas Tirith. But a few years after the devastating battle launched by Morgoth, Dagor Bragolak, Sauron assaulted Minas Tirith. His dark shadow instilled fear and despair among Orodreth's guards, and many abandoned it. Sauron captured the tower and began to breed werewolves in it. He then named it Tol in Gauroth, the Isle of the Werewolves. One of the most incredible contests of the First Age, which doesn't get talked about nearly enough, was set off because of the events of Tol in Gauroth. Sauron had captured Beren, a man from the House of Beor, and Finrod and his elves. Beren's lady love, the elf princess Luthien, came to Tolan Gawroth to attempt a rescue, armed with nothing except her spells and Huan. As it turned out, Huan, the Great Hound of Valinor, was all she needed. Huan crushed all of Sauron's werewolves out there. Then Sauron went to get the Hound himself, but Huan was too much for him. He quashed Sauron with such ease that Sauron had to shapeshift into a bat and get up out of there quick. Luthien and Huan rescued Beren, but hanging with the couple cost Huan. It brought him face to face with the greatest evil werewolf ever, Karkaroth. If you'd like to get into the details of the insane battle of the beasts, we have other videos on it. The mighty Huan explained and Karkaroth explored. So Huan sent Sauron packing. Luthien, who had obtained the fort's magic from Sauron, destroyed the place and cleansed it of its evil. Okay, up ahead we've got a dark locale you've surely noticed in the films. Tower of Kirth Ungol. The Tower of Kirth Ungol was a three-tiered fort carved into the eastern body of the Fel-Dúath Mountains. On the western border of Morgoth, this tower stood to the left of Kirth Ungol Pass. After Frodo was attacked by the giant spider, Shelob, the orcs took him to the Tower of Kirth Ungol to search him and famously go into a mass fight to the death over his mithril chainmail. The tower was built by the Gondorians after the War of the Last Alliance as the eastern outpost of Minas Ithil. Like Minas Ithil, it fell to the forces of the Witch King of Angmar. But before the occupation of Ithil, the tower became a base for Sauron's Orc and Uruk-hai garrisons, and it looked every bit the wicked stronghold it had become. Its high turret stood over its three tiers, which stuck out with their pointy parapets. The main gate that opened into a sharply sloping path joining the Morgul Pass was flanked by the Watchers. The Watchers were two imposing, frightful statues filled with a magical vigil of sorts. Each Watcher was a three-bodied creature with vultures' heads sitting on a throne of black stone. These enchanted figures kept a watch on the gate, and no one went unnoticed by their unmoving eyes. If an outsider tried infiltrating the tower, the Watchers would let out a shrill alarm to warn the guards. Amazing, right? Burglar alarm and motion sensors be damned. The tower also had an undergate that followed the path to Shelob's lair. The role-playing and online games, as well as the movie adaptations, have taken elements from the chapter on Kirth Ungol in the second Return of the King book. Peter Jackson's portrayal of Frodo's capture by the orcs in Return of the King had us biting our nails to the quick. Frodo was swathed in Shelob's silky threads like a mummy when the orcs took him through the Undergate into the Tower of Kirth Ungol. There, they saw his mithril chainmail and went AWOL, literally killing each other over it. They gave Sam the opportunity to jog Frodo up and get him out of there. Durthing. Durthing's fate was quite similar to the Tower of Kirth Ungol. Durthing, which translates to Dark Opposition in Sindarin, was a fortress built in the mountains of Fel-Dúath in the wake of the War of the Last Alliance to pad up Gondor's defenses against future evil forces. However, with the decline of Gondor's power following the Great Plague, the fortress was abandoned. When Sauron returned to Mordor to make it his main stronghold, he also occupied Durthing, building it up again and garrisoning it with his forces. Orc forces had later marched down from Durthing for the Battle of the Black Gate. Frodo and Sam passed Durthing as they closed in on Mount Doom and watched the orcs being mobilized. The fate of Durthing after Sauron's defeat is unclear, but chances are it stood where it was, once again abandoned. Marvelous verdict. Sauron wasn't as much a builder and didn't create complex city forts or watchtowers. He was a conqueror. While he made some of the fortifications in Mordor, like Barad-dur and the Black Gate, pouring his venom into their very foundations, most of his strongholds were once the defenses of elves and men against him. So I'm sure his capture of these spots came with a pinch of some sadistic pleasure. But after the War of the Ring, when Sauron was out and out defeated, the structures he had raised crumbled with him. In contrast, the forts that formerly belonged to Gondorians or elves did not fall, even though they leveled some to eradicate the evil they were steeped with. In his reign, however, Sauron favored Barad-dur over all else. It was because of Mount Doom, whose fire he had used for his dark arts, as well as the smithcraft that aided his army's weaponry. Aside from his relatively small stint in Dol Guldur, this remained his only home sweet home. So that's all from us today. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye for now!